Ma'am, unless you're delivering something you need to leave the premises. Our suites aren't available for walk-ins like you. The words hung in the air like a slap, sharp, loud, deliberately public, and every head in the Grand Meridian Hotel lobby turned to look. Grace Walker didn't flinch. She stood silently in front of the marble reception counter, holding her small leather purse, her posture calm, shoulders, relaxed eyes steady. But inside, a storm was already building. Before we go any further, I want to know, where are you watching from today? Drop your city or state in the comments. And if you care about justice, fairness, and stories that expose the truth, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Now let's get back to what happened next. Grace had arrived at the Grand Meridian, a brand new luxury hotel in downtown Atlanta, dressed in a plain white t-shirt, cream-colored slacks, and low heels. Her hair was neatly braided, her face bare of makeup. She looked like any other traveler, except in Ethan Clark's eyes, she didn't look like she belonged. Ethan was the hotel manager, mid-40s, polished, polite on the surface. But when Grace approached the front desk and asked about booking a VIP suite, he didn't even bother checking the system. He simply looked her up and down, curled his lip ever so slightly, and said, "We don't have anything available for your type." The young man beside him, Lucas Wright, no older than 28, let out a quick snort, trying to cover it with a cough, but the message was clear. Grace asked again, this time calmly, "Are you saying there are no vacancies or that I'm not welcome to inquire?" Ethan gave a smug smile, leaned on the counter, and replied, "There's a budget motel just a few blocks down. Might be more your speed." He didn't know who he was talking to, and that was the point. Grace had come without a reservation. No assistant, no driver, no entourage. She wasn't here to be recognized. She was here to observe. Over the past month, complaints had begun to circulate from guests, particularly black guests who felt unwelcome, dismissed, or outright ignored at the Grand Meridian. As CEO of Meridian Enterprises, the company that owned the hotel, Grace Walker had decided to see it for herself. And now, standing here, she had all the proof she needed. Lucas chimed in again, eager to impress Ethan. "Our premium suites require a hefty deposit, ma'am. I'm sure you understand." The word "ma'am" was laced with disrespect. Grace gave no reaction. She simply took one step to the side, pulled out her phone, and calmly said into the receiver, "John, I need you here in 10 minutes. Main lobby. No further explanation. No raised voice, no emotion. Just clarity." Across the lobby, Henry Walker, no relation to Grace, leaned back in one of the leather armchairs near the lounge. A white man in his late 50s, wearing a dark tailored suit, sipping bourbon, he'd been watching the exchange with amusement. "Some people don't know their place," he muttered, just loud enough for others to hear. "This isn't a bus station." His tone drew a quiet laugh from a couple seated nearby. Grace heard every word but didn't turn. Instead, she locked eyes with Ethan, who still hadn't moved from behind the counter. "Is this the service you give all your guests?" she asked. Ethan folded his arms and gave a practiced smirk. "Just trying to maintain our standards." Behind the desk, a young black intern named Harper Harris had been typing in silence. Early 20s, smart, observant. She'd seen this routine before, but never this blatant. Harper's heart pounded as she debated speaking up, but fear held her tongue. She knew Ethan had a short temper and a long memory. Aria Young and Lily Lewis, two white women in their 50s, sitting near the fireplace with conference badges around their necks, had also noticed the interaction. Aria leaned toward Lily and whispered, "Did you hear what he just said to her?" Lily nodded, frowning. "This is outrageous." They weren't sure what to do yet, but something about the woman's presence, the quiet confidence in her voice, made them pay attention. Back at the counter, Ethan pulled out his phone and began typing, muttering something about calling security. Lucas straightened his tie, trying to appear official, and Jacob Robinson, the hotel's on-duty security guard, white, stocky, early 30s, emerged from the side hallway, standing just behind Grace. "Problem here?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer directly. He just gestured subtly toward Grace and said, "Might need to escort someone out if they refuse to leave." Grace didn't move, didn't blink. She just stood with the calmness of someone who had seen worse and come out stronger. Her thoughts flashed briefly to a memory from 30 years ago. She had walked into a corporate office for her first ever job interview, and the receptionist told her, without asking a single question, deliveries go through the back. That sting had stayed with her. But so had the lesson. The only way to change the system was to own it. And now she did. The clock above the check-in desk ticked forward. 1 minute. 2. Ethan kept sneaking glances at Grace, starting to sense that something was off, but still too proud to step back. Lucas pulled up the reservation system on his screen, pretending to look busy. Harper continued typing quietly, emailing herself notes. Arya and Lily watched now, whispering less and observing more. And Henry. He poured himself another drink, shaking his head. "Unbelievable," he muttered. At exactly the 10-minute mark, the glass doors to the lobby opened. A sharply dressed black man in a navy suit walked in with purposeful strides, holding a tablet in one hand and scanning the room. His voice was calm but carried weight. "Ms. Walker, I have everything you asked for." Ethan blinked. Lucas froze. Jacob stepped back slightly. Grace took one step forward, her expression unchanged. "Thank you, John," she said softly. Then she turned fully to face Ethan and said just 5 words. "Let's start with the truth." Ethan Clark stood still, his jaw tightening as the name Grace Walker echoed in his mind, like a warning bell he should have heard sooner. But his pride, rooted in years of unchecked bias and a well-rehearsed facade of professionalism, kept him frozen in place. Grace, meanwhile, turned her back to him without a word, exchanging a quiet glance with John Brown, her assistant, who now stood at her side with the quiet authority of someone used to managing powerful situations. Lucas, the young front desk clerk, awkwardly reached for a notepad, as if that might make him seem occupied, but his face had drained of color. The confidence he'd worn just minutes earlier now cracked like cheap porcelain. Yet Ethan, still clinging to some semblance of control, leaned over to Lucas and muttered just loudly enough for Grace to hear. People like her always find a way to push where they don't belong. Lucas nodded reflexively, half listening, half regretting every second of the interaction. Grace didn't react, at least not outwardly, but her silence spoke louder than any raised voice. It was the kind of silence sharpened by years of experience of being judged before she even said her name. And in that silence, memories returned. Vivid, painful, motivating. She remembered being 21, standing outside a corporate building downtown, dressed in a second-hand blazer and heels that pinched. She had arrived early for an interview, her first big break. But the receptionist never even looked at her resume. Instead, she pointed to the back exit and said, "Deliveries aren't through here." Grace had walked away that day, humiliated but not broken. It was the moment she decided she'd never wait for permission to belong in a room again. And now, decades later, she was the one who built the rooms. But the sting never fully faded. Across the counter, Ethan wasn't done. He spoke louder this time, addressing John directly, as if to reassert control. "I hope you're not under the impression that pulling some power move is going to earn her a free night. This is still a business, not some charity project." The words hung in the air, cold, sharp, and ignorant. John remained calm, his voice steady. "We don't need a free night, Mr. Clark. Ms. Walker owns the building." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. No words came. His gaze bounced between Grace and John, searching for some crack in their story, some mistake that might save him, but none came. The walls were closing in, and he knew it. From behind the desk, Harper Harris paused her typing. She had worked here for 6 weeks, long enough to witness the pattern. Black guests ignored Hispanic guests, spoken to slowly and condescendingly, and anyone who didn't fit Ethan's imagined standard treated like an inconvenience. She had come into this job hopeful, fresh from college with a hospitality degree and student loans, but Ethan had reduced her to menial paperwork and coffee runs. When she asked to shadow a manager, he told her to master the basics first. Now, as she watched Grace stand tall and unshaken, Harper felt something shift inside her. This woman wasn't just powerful. She was living proof that Ethan's world wasn't unbreakable. And maybe Harper didn't have to stay silent. Meanwhile, Henry Walker, the smug guest in the lobby, was still seated nearby, sipping from his tumbler, pretending to read the Wall Street Journal, but stealing glances at the unfolding drama. He chuckled to himself, muttering, "This is what happens when people get too comfortable." His voice, dripping with entitlement, drew another hard glance from Grace. She didn't respond with words, just one piercing look that made him set the glass down. For the first time, Henry felt exposed. Aria Young and Lily Lewis, seated closer now, had gone from passive observers to quietly engaged witnesses. Aria leaned in and whispered, "She's the CEO. Can you believe they talked to her like that?" Lily shook her head slowly. They didn't even ask for her name. The two women exchanged a knowing look, one that said this moment wasn't just about one person being wronged. It was about a system that had gone unchecked for too long. At the same time, Jacob Robinson, the security guard, shifted uncomfortably by the hallway. He had followed Ethan's orders more times than he could count, escorting guests out, issuing warnings, denying access. But this time felt different. He had watched Grace with a growing sense of doubt. She never raised her voice, never lost her cool, and yet the entire energy of the lobby had shifted around her. Jacob had a sinking feeling that his name might be next in the conversation, and not in a good way. Still, he stayed put. Years of loyalty to Ethan and fear of rocking the boat kept him frozen. Ethan tried once more to regain control. "Look, if there was some miscommunication, I apologize. But this isn't how things are normally done. We have protocols, procedures." Grace turned back toward him, then stepping closer. "I asked if you had availability," she said, her voice smooth but pointed. "You never checked. You never even asked for my name. You judged me by my skin and my clothes, and you made a decision." Ethan opened his mouth to argue, but the words never came. Grace didn't need to yell. She had already won. Her calm was more commanding than any threat. And when her phone buzzed again, she answered with two words, "Bring her." Lucas looked confused. Ethan looked panicked. And Harper, for the first time since she started working there, smiled. Not a big smile, just a quiet one. The kind that says, "Finally." Grace returned her phone to her purse-locked eyes with Ethan and said, "The next person you meet will be Olivia Carter, head of HR for Meridian Enterprises. I suggest you remember everything you just said, and everything you chose not to." The color drained from Ethan's face. Lucas whispered Olivia Carter to no one in particular, and Henry finally stood up, adjusting his blazer, his face flushed. But there was no escape. Grace had come quietly, but now that the truth was out, no one would leave unchanged. The glass doors of the Grand Meridian Hotel opened once more, and in walked Olivia Carter, the HR director of Meridian Enterprises. Tall, composed, dressed in a charcoal gray suit with a badge clipped to her lapel, she exuded an energy that turned heads even before anyone knew her name. She crossed the lobby without hesitation, heels clicking confidently on the marble floor, her eyes locking immediately with Grace Walker's. "Ms. Walker," she said respectfully, handing her a folder. "Here's the initial report you requested. I've already begun pulling personnel files. That sentence alone made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. Ethan Clark looked like he had swallowed ice. His voice caught in his throat. "Personnel files," he repeated, barely audible. Lucas dropped his pen again. Jacob, the security guard, stepped back near the wall, arms crossed, but now it was more defensive than authoritative. Grace took the folder, flipped it open, glanced at the documents, and then closed it slowly, deliberately. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her presence now commanded the entire lobby. Everyone in this room, guests, staff, security, deserves to know what just happened here. and why it matters. Her tone was not angry, but clear-clipped and unmistakably resolute. I didn't come here to make a scene. I came because complaints were piling up from guests, particularly guests of color who said they were made to feel unwelcome. So I did what any good leader does. I showed up unannounced, looking like any other traveler. Her eyes swept the room, stopping briefly on each person who had played a part in what just happened. And what I found, she continued, confirms the worst of what I feared. She turned directly to Ethan. You dismissed me at first glance. You told me to go to a motel. You mocked my presence. And you never once asked for my name. Ethan's mouth opened. Ms. Walker. She raised a hand, gently stopping him without effort. Don't. Not yet. She turned to Olivia. You heard the exchange? Olivia nodded. I reviewed security footage on the way over. We have full audio. At that, Ethan visibly winced. Lucas took a shaky step back. Henry Walker, the wealthy guest who had made the snide remark earlier, now stood awkwardly near the lounge, attempting to blend into the background, but Grace wasn't about to let any of them slip away. Mr. Walker, she said sharply. He turned. Yes, he said, trying to sound dignified. You made a comment about people knowing their place. Would you care to explain what you meant by that? Henry chuckled nervously. It was just an observation, not directed at anyone specifically. Grace nodded. Of course. But the problem is it was. And that culture of subtle condescension, it's exactly what allows blatant discrimination to thrive. The room was utterly silent. Behind the desk, Harper Harris had stopped pretending to work. She looked at Grace with something close to awe. In her short time at the hotel, she had never seen anyone stand up to Ethan, let alone reduce him to silence. Arya and Lily, the two guests seated nearby, slowly stood and walked closer to Grace. Arya cleared her throat. Ms. Walker, we saw everything. From the moment you stepped in, it was cruel and it was wrong. Grace gave a soft, grateful nod. Thank you for speaking. Then she turned to the front desk again. Lucas, she said, her tone like a schoolteacher calling on a student caught cheating. You laughed at me. You made assumptions about my finances. Do you remember what you said? Lucas swallowed hard. I didn't mean it like that. I was just following Mr. Clark's lead. Grace raised her eyebrows. You mean you chose to mimic your superior's bias in order to protect your own position? Is that correct? Lucas looked at the floor. Yes, ma'am. Olivia scribbled something into her notes. Then Grace turned to Jacob, who had remained silent through the ordeal. And you, she said. You didn't say anything offensive, but you were ready to put your hands on me and escort me out without asking any questions. Is that your standard operating procedure? Jacob hesitated, then nodded once. It's what I was told to do. Grace sighed. Exactly. Obedience without judgment. Then her tone shifted, stronger, firmer. This hotel bears my name, my brand, and my reputation. And what just happened in this lobby is unacceptable. It undermines everything I've built, everything I stand for. She stepped forward again, standing in the center of the lobby like a judge at a public hearing. I built Meridian Enterprises from the ground up. I was once a housekeeper mopping floors in rooms smaller than this one. I've been ignored, overlooked, talked down to. I know what it feels like to be dismissed by someone who doesn't know your story, and I vowed that when I got to the top, no one under my roof would ever be made to feel that way again. A hush swept across the lobby as her words settled like gravity. Even guests who had been only half listening were now fully tuned in. So let me be clear, Grace continued. Ethan Clark, Lucas Wright, Jacob Robinson, effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. Your access will be revoked as of this moment. You will turn in your badges to Olivia before leaving the premises. The words were calm, clinical, but they carried the weight of final judgment. Ethan tried to object. Ms. Walker, I've been with the company for I know exactly how long you've been here, Grace cut in. And every complaint under your watch has your name on it. This isn't personal. It's professional, and it's overdue. Jacob looked stunned. Lucas looked like he might cry. Harper's eyes widened. Then Grace added, "However, I believe in redemption. I believe people can learn if they're willing to do the work." She looked to Olivia. "Set up a mandatory training series for all staff beginning tomorrow. Invite them to attend, but make it clear it's not optional if they want to return." Olivia nodded. Understood. Grace turned back to the room. "This is not just about me. It's about every guest who has ever felt small, unseen, or unwelcome. And that changes today." She stepped back, folded the HR folder under her arm, and nodded once toward Olivia. "Handle it." Then, without raising her voice, without slamming a fist or pointing a finger, Grace Walker walked across the lobby, past the chandeliers, past the stunned faces, and took a seat in one of the VIP lounges. Because the only thing louder than rage is quiet authority. And tonight, it echoed through every corner of that hotel. The conference room on the second floor of the Grand Meridian had never felt so tense. Moments after Grace Walker quietly took her seat in the VIP lounge, Olivia Carter swiftly gathered the suspended staff and directed them to the glass-walled boardroom where they now sat facing her in a long, uncomfortable silence. Ethan Clark's usual cocky demeanor had dissolved into a stunned, speechless stare. His fingers tapped nervously against the polished wood table. Lucas Wright sat 2 seats down, cheeks flushed, eyes fixed on the table, while Jacob Robinson leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, trying to appear composed, but failing. Outside the room, Harper Harris stood hesitantly near the door, clutching a notepad to her chest. Olivia glanced at her. "Come in, Harper," she said kindly. "Ms. Walker requested you join us." The young intern stepped inside slowly, unsure why she had been included, but then again, everything was shifting tonight. Grace entered last. She didn't slam the door or raise her voice. She simply walked in, placed a thin folder on the table, and remained standing. The silence deepened as she looked each person in the eye. "I want to be very clear," she began, her voice steady and unflinching. "This is not about punishing people for one bad moment. This is about addressing a pattern, a culture that has taken root under leadership that should have known better." Her eyes locked onto Ethan first. "I hired you because you had experience, because I believed you understood the standards Meridian stands for. But what I saw today, what I heard, that wasn't a fluke. That was familiarity. You've said those things before. You've made assumptions before. And what's worse, you trained others to do the same." Ethan opened his mouth, but Grace held up her hand. "Not yet. You'll have your turn. I'm not here to destroy anyone's career, but I am here to draw a line." She turned to Lucas. "You're young. You had a choice tonight. You chose to follow Ethan not because you had to, but because it was easier. Because you thought it would help you get ahead. But at what cost?" Lucas nodded slowly, his voice barely a whisper. "You're right, ma'am. I did." Grace continued, now turning to Jacob. "And you. You didn't say a single word. But you were ready to remove me from the building, no questions asked. Just orders followed. Do you know how dangerous that kind of obedience is?" Jacob stared at her, then shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am. I didn't think. I just did what I was told." "Exactly," Grace said. "And that's the problem. You didn't think." Then she turned to Harper. The shift in tone was immediate, gentler, but still direct. "Harper, I know you've been silenced. You've been passed over, talked down to, and made invisible. But you stayed. You watched. You took notes. And you showed extraordinary restraint. That's strength." Harper's voice shook as she replied, I didn't know if it was my place to speak." Grace offered a soft smile. "It's always your place to speak when something's wrong. But tonight you don't have to do it alone." At that moment, Olivia stepped forward, holding a document packet. "We've compiled formal complaints from both guests and junior staff. Some go back to the first month this hotel opened. Many were dismissed by management before they ever reached HR. She placed the packet in front of Ethan. His hands trembled as he opened it. Pages of emails, statements, and incident reports stared back at him. He glanced up at Grace. "I didn't realize it had gotten this bad." Grace's response was quiet, but piercing. "That's not an excuse. That's a failure of leadership." Then she addressed the room again. "I believe in accountability, but I also believe in second chances. So here's what's going to happen." The room leaned in. "You three, Ethan, Lucas, Jacob, are suspended. Yes, but your futures here depend on one thing: action. You will attend an intensive month-long diversity and equity training. Not a check-the-box seminar. A real program led by external experts with written assessments and team evaluations. If and only if you complete it with sincerity and show clear change, you'll be considered for reinstatement in roles better suited to rebuilding trust." The men nodded, humbled, shaken. "But understand," she continued, "you're not owed a second chance. You have to earn it." Then, turning back to Harper, Grace spoke with renewed warmth. "Effective immediately, Harper, you are promoted to Guest Experience Coordinator. You'll oversee front-of-house training and report directly to Olivia. Your observations will shape future hiring." Harper's eyes filled with tears, her hands shaking. "Thank you, Ms. Walker. I won't let you down." Grace stepped closer and said softly, "You've already proven your worth. Now you get to lead." Olivia stepped forward once more. "Staff training begins tomorrow at 8 a.m. I'll stay behind to discuss logistics. The three of you may leave for the evening, but your badges stay here." Ethan removed his badge, slowly placing it on the table. Lucas followed suit, then Jacob. None of them said a word. They simply stood and walked out quietly, soberly. Harper remained seated, overwhelmed but radiant. Grace gathered the last of her materials and turned to Olivia. "Prepare a guest-wide communication. Let them know Meridian is addressing concerns openly. No spin, just truth. This place is going to stand for something real." Olivia nodded firmly. "It already does. Because you walked in tonight." As Grace exited the room, she glanced over the lobby below, now calm whispers replaced by quiet respect. Arya and Lily stood by the elevator waiting. "That was remarkable," Lily said. Grace smiled faintly. It was overdue. Arya leaned forward. "Can we invite you to speak at our leadership conference next month? People need to hear this." Grace paused, considering. "Only if we hold it here." The women grinned. "Deal." And just like that, the Grand Meridian was no longer just a hotel. It was a turning point. And the message was clear: silence has a cost, but truth has power. The morning after the confrontation, the Grand Meridian was unusually quiet. The clink of silverware in the breakfast lounge sounded sharper. Staff spoke in lowered tones. The weight of the previous evening still lingered in the air like perfume that wouldn't quite fade. In the executive meeting room, Grace Walker stood at the head of the table once again, but this time the atmosphere had shifted. Gone was the wall of defensiveness. In its place sat something more fragile, more honest vulnerability. Ethan Clark sat across from her, no longer the polished manager with clipped confidence, but a man carrying the visible weight of realization. Next to him sat Lucas' right hands, folded tightly, his face pale but focused, and Jacob Robinson, the security guard who once stood ready to escort Grace out, now leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, eyes searching for understanding. Olivia Carter stood quietly near the whiteboard, her presence steady and supportive. Harper Harris, now dressed in the Guest Experience Coordinator blazer that had once belonged to someone else, took notes beside her. Grace didn't speak immediately. She allowed the silence to settle. When she finally began, her voice was softer than the night before, but it held the same unmistakable gravity. "You each have a decision to make today," she said. "No one's going to force your hand. But I want to be clear, what happens from this point forward is entirely up to you." She turned her gaze first to Ethan. "I read your personnel file last night. You've spent 20 years in hospitality. You climbed the ladder, managed high-profile properties, kept your numbers strong. But none of that erases what happened yesterday. Ethan nodded slowly. I know, and I deserve the suspension. Grace tilted her head slightly. Tell me, why did you assume I didn't belong? Ethan paused. His voice cracked slightly as he began. Years ago back in Chicago, I was managing a property downtown. One night, a teenager black came into the lobby, asked to use the restroom. I let him. 10 minutes later, he walked out with my laptop bag. I lost everything on it: client data, personal files, contracts. I filed a report, but no one cared. I told myself from then on I'd never be that trusting again. He looked up, guilt washing over his face. But I didn't just lose trust in one person. I built a wall against anyone who looked like him. Grace nodded solemnly. Trauma explains it, but it doesn't excuse it. Ethan swallowed. I know. I see it now. I made people feel small, people who had done nothing wrong. And last night, I looked at you and I didn't see a CEO. I just saw someone I didn't want to be wrong about. That's on me. Grace turned next to Lucas. And you, Lucas, didn't hesitate. I wanted Ethan to like me, to see me as someone who got it. So when he judged you, I joined in. I laughed. I implied you couldn't afford a room. I thought I was being clever. But all I was doing was proving how weak I was. His voice trembled as he added, I'm sorry, Ms. Walker. Truly. Grace took a moment, then turned to Jacob. You didn't say a word yesterday, but you were ready to put your hands on me. What made you so quick to act? Jacob looked down. Because I've always followed orders. I thought it kept me safe. I didn't think about who it hurt. I just did what I was told. But after seeing how calm you were, and how wrong we were, I couldn't sleep last night. I kept seeing your face. Grace's tone softened slightly. The truth is, we're all taught habits, some from fear, some from pride, and some from silence. But habits can be unlearned, and redemption isn't about apology, it's about effort. She stood, walked to the window, and looked out over downtown Atlanta. I built Meridian because I wanted to create more than hotels. I wanted to create places of dignity, places where no one gets asked if they belong. I failed to protect that vision here, but now I get to rebuild it. She turned back to face them. So here's what I'm offering. You've each agreed to attend the month-long training, but that's just the beginning. Olivia stepped forward with 3 sealed envelopes. Each of you will be assigned a mentor, someone who's walked a different road than you. You'll shadow staff in every department from housekeeping to night security. You'll spend a day in the shoes of those you've never seen, and you'll write about it weekly. Reflections, real ones. If you phone it in, you're done. But if you grow, we'll welcome you back. The men nodded. No protest, no defensiveness, just quiet understanding. Then Grace turned to Harper, motioning her to stand. Harper, as part of your new role, you'll oversee guest feedback response and frontline culture. You'll also sit in on senior hiring interviews moving forward. Harper blinked. Me? Yes, Grace said. Your insight matters, and it's time the right people had a seat at the table. Harper's voice cracked as she said, Thank you. I won't waste this. Grace placed a hand gently on Harper's shoulder. You already earned it. Then she turned back to Ethan. You said something important about seeing people through a filter of fear. Let me ask you this. When you looked at me last night, what scared you more, that I might be someone to distrust, or that I might be someone in power who didn't look like you? Ethan didn't answer right away, but his silence said more than words could. Both he finally whispered. Then it's time, Grace said, to start seeing people clearly. Without fear, without assumption, without hierarchy. Olivia handed out the training packets and Grace stepped toward the door. But before leaving, she paused. You won't fix this overnight. But what matters now is that you try. And with that, she exited, leaving behind a room that no longer felt like a battlefield, but a classroom. The reckoning had passed. What remained was the invitation to do better, to be better, and to prove that real leadership isn't about who's in charge, but who's willing to change. 3 days later, the staff of the Grand Meridian gathered in the main ballroom for what would become the most important meeting in the hotel's young history. The long mahogany tables had been cleared. Every employee, from valet to kitchen crew, from housekeepers to concierge, sat in quiet anticipation. Some still felt shaken, others curious. But all of them knew this wasn't going to be business as usual. At the front of the room stood Grace Walker, not in a suit, not with bodyguards or assistants flanking her, but in the same simple white blouse and slacks she had worn the night she was denied service because her message today wasn't about image. It was about truth. She waited for the room to fall completely silent, then spoke without a microphone, her voice calm but commanding, echoing gently through the high ceilings. "Let's be honest with one another," she began. "This building is beautiful. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, imported linens and sleek branding. But none of that matters if the people inside it aren't treated with dignity. What happened here last week wasn't just a moment, it was a mirror. And what it reflected wasn't just about me, it was about us." A murmur rippled through the staff. Grace paused, letting her words settle. "I didn't start as a CEO. Most of you know that. I was a housekeeper. I scrubbed toilets in motels where guests wouldn't even look me in the eye. I worked the night shift while raising 2 kids. I had managers who forgot my name and guests who assumed I couldn't speak English. And every time someone treated me like I didn't belong, I made myself a promise when I had power, I'd use it to protect the people who didn't." Her voice deepened, filled with conviction. "Power means nothing if it only serves you. But when it serves others, when it lifts people up instead of pressing them down, that's leadership." Several heads nodded. Even the most skeptical employees found themselves sitting up straighter. She continued, "You all work hard. I know that. You carry bags, clean rooms, soothe angry guests, memorize preferences, and keep this place running. But the culture we allow, the tone we set, starts from the top, and it seeps into every conversation, every glance, every decision." She turned to Harper, who now stood off to the side in her new uniform. "That's why I've asked Harper Harris to lead our new Hospitality Equity Task Force. She'll oversee inclusive guest experiences, review complaint patterns, and most importantly, listen." Harper's eyes widened, but she stepped forward confidently as Grace motioned her closer. "Harper will not just sit at the table, she will help build it." A ripple of surprise and applause moved through the room. Grace nodded in appreciation, then returned to her message. "We are launching a new 3-tier training program across all Meridian properties. Not just about policies and procedures, but about empathy, identity, and what it means to truly serve. Not serve like the word some people use to imply submission. I mean serve with excellence, with respect, and with the belief that every person who walks through those doors deserves to feel seen." She looked around the room, locking eyes with the housekeeper in the back, the bellhop near the window, the kitchen manager seated near the middle row. "Some of you have been quiet witnesses to what's gone wrong. Some of you were afraid to speak. I understand that. But from this point forward, silence will no longer be the price of employment. If something feels wrong, say something. If you witness injustice, report it. You will be heard, and you will be protected." She paused again, letting the weight of that promise land. Ethan Clark, Lucas Wright, and Jacob Robinson have begun their required training. They are not gone. They are learning. I don't believe in canceling people. I believe in correcting behavior and restoring trust through real work. And that work is now a part of our DNA. Her tone softened slightly. This moment is not about shame. It's about transformation. This hotel is not just going to be a 5-star property. It's going to be a 5-star culture. The kind people remember not because of the thread count in the sheets, but because of how they were made to feel. She walked closer to the front row, her voice still gentle but filled with urgency. We can't control what guests bring in with them, bias, entitlement, arrogance, but we can control how we respond. Every smile, every welcome, every small act of integrity matters. Olivia Carter stepped up beside her with a clipboard, nodding firmly. All staff will begin onboarding into the new Meridian Dignity Framework next week. Monthly feedback sessions will be mandatory. Promotions will now factor in peer respect and guest equity scores. We're not just managing numbers anymore. We're managing people. A burst of clapping broke out, led by Harper, followed by several more staff members who had once felt overlooked. Grace raised her hand gently. One last thing she said, her voice now soft with emotion. A few nights ago, I was told I didn't belong here. And truth be told, part of me wanted to walk away, to fire everyone and start fresh. But then I looked around, and I saw Harper. I saw the quiet workers in the corners. I saw the guests who spoke up. And I realized, this place is worth saving, because it's not the building, it's the people. The room was completely still, her words pulling everyone into a shared silence that felt like reverence. So today she finished We Start Over, not just with new policies, but with new purpose. We're not just opening doors for guests, we're opening minds. And the only question now is who we choose to be when no one's watching. With that, she stepped back, nodded once, and left the room in silence. Not a single person moved for several seconds, because sometimes the most powerful sound isn't a voice. It's the echo of a message that finally lands in the heart. 1 month later, the Grand Meridian didn't just look different, it felt different. The marble floors still gleamed, the chandeliers still sparkled, and the concierge still offered guests chilled cucumber water on arrival, but now something deeper pulsed through the building's foundation. Respect, dignity, change. The transformation was not cosmetic, it was cultural. Grace Walker had not returned to the hotel in the weeks since the incident. She had given space for the reforms to breathe without her shadow looming. But on a warm Thursday afternoon, dressed again in her signature white blouse and slacks, she walked through the glass doors, not as a secret guest this time, but as herself. A small crowd of staff stood near the front desk. They didn't rush her. They didn't scatter. They simply stood taller, proud of what had grown in her absence. Harper Harris greeted her first, now wearing a name badge that read, Harper Harris Guest Experience Director. She was no longer the timid intern who typed quietly in the background. She moved with grace, with purpose. "Welcome back, Ms. Walker," Harper said, smiling brightly. "You'll be pleased to know every department passed their first review." Grace smiled. "I didn't come to check boxes," she said warmly. "I came to see how it feels." And it felt alive. Jacob Robinson, once silent and mechanical, now stood at the edge of the lobby chatting with an elderly guest as he helped her with directions to a nearby museum. His posture had changed, not stiff or guarded, but open. He caught Grace's eye and gave a respectful nod. Lucas Wright stood near the business center, guiding a family through their check-in with patience and sincerity. When their son spilled juice on the counter, Lucas didn't flinch. He handed them tissues and smiled, not for show, but with genuine warmth. Later in the staff break room, Ethan Clark stood at the front, addressing a small group of new hires. He wasn't wearing a manager's name tag anymore. He'd taken a demotion to become a training consultant for Meridian's new employee onboarding program. His voice was humbler, quieter, but every word was deliberate. "What you say to someone in their first 30 seconds here," Ethan told the group, "can either lift them up or put a weight on their shoulders. Don't assume. Just serve with heart." When he saw Grace in the doorway, he paused, then walked over. "Thank you," he said, without pretense, "for giving me the chance to become better. I didn't deserve it then, but I'm trying to now." Grace looked at him and said, "Trying is how it starts, but living it, that's how it lasts." Back in the lobby, guests moved freely. A mother with her teenage daughter, an elderly black couple celebrating their anniversary, a group of international tourists with different accents, different shades of skin. Everyone was greeted the same way with eye contact, respect, and welcome. Grace took a seat in the lounge, observing the flow of movement and conversation. It was quiet progress, but unmistakable. Aria Young and Lily Lewis, now loyal guests, sat nearby sipping tea. They recognized her immediately. "We've been telling your story at every conference we attend," Aria said, smiling. "You're becoming a case study in how to lead with strength and soul." Grace chuckled. "I didn't do anything remarkable. I just showed up." Lily leaned in. "Exactly. And that's the part most people miss." A soft vibration from Grace's phone pulled her attention. It was a photo from Olivia Carter taken at another Meridian property in Chicago. The caption read, "Guest Protocol in Action. 3 escalations handled with grace. Equity Index 96% positive." Grace replied with a single word, "Excellent." As she looked around, her mind drifted not to numbers or spreadsheets or shareholder reports, but to the janitor's closet she once sat in on her break at 22 years old, eating a sandwich with rubber gloves in her pocket, wondering if anyone would ever say her name with respect. She thought about her grandmother who used to whisper, "Hold your head high, baby," even when they looked down on you. And she thought about the night just weeks ago when she had been told to leave her own hotel. And how in that moment she had chosen not anger, but clarity, not revenge, but reform. That choice had changed everything. As she stood to leave, Harper joined her at the elevator. "Ms. Walker," she said, voice filled with gratitude, "this place. It breathes differently now." Grace smiled. It should. We finally opened the windows. Before stepping into the elevator, Grace turned and looked once more at the lobby at the housekeeper, adjusting the flowers at the young black bellhop, holding the door for a guest with a cane at the teenage receptionist, greeting a Spanish-speaking couple without hesitation. It was working. Not perfectly, but truthfully. Not instantly, but intentionally. As the elevator doors closed, Grace whispered to herself, "Judgment divides, but understanding rebuilds." 1 month ago, she had walked into this hotel as a stranger in her own empire. Now she was leaving it as a founder of something stronger, a culture, not just a company. The Grand Meridian would never be the same, and neither would the people in it. Because dignity once awakened doesn't go back to sleep, and once a door like that opens, the right people make sure it stays open for everyone. Thank you for watching. If this story spoke to you, please like, share, and subscribe. We appreciate you, and we'll see you in the next story.